Thorney Weir is situated in the heart of the Colne Valley, west of London, not far from Heathrow Airport, and has got a very, very long and spectacular carp angling history. It's been a prime location for day ticket fishing for incredible looking carp for a very, very long time now. And I first fished it probably getting on for 20 years ago when I was doing some filming for Carp TV and for a bit of my own fishing. I remember coming up here and catching a really nice old 19-pounder out the edge in that channel when it was freezing cold. And as you can see, the lake itself is incredibly mature. It's typical of these gravel pit extractions that sort of litter the periphery of the M25, and a lot of them were dug out in the 50s or some actually a lot earlier than that. Raisbury goes back to the 20s and 30s, and huge amount of aggregate was removed for creation of the M25, London building itself, Heathrow Airport and so on. So you have these very old, very mature gravel pits, and they all have a distinct, unique sort of feel. They have old bits of metal sticking out of the bank and old worn looking swims and fallen trees, and they just have a sense of maturity that a lot of modern lakes don't seem to have. And for that reason, Thorny Weir, it's long been a favourite of mine, though I haven't fished it very often. Partly that's been down to geography, and yesterday the journey took me best part of 4 hours to get here, but it's an amazing place with some very, very old and amazing looking fish. And in the past they've gone well over 40 pounds, and I think there's 2 40-pound commons in here at the moment. Very, very good healthy head of 30s. Gets very weedy in the summer. You know, it's that typical rich gravel pit where you get a lot of weed. The water's usually very clear, and you've got a litany of islands, and there's a sunken barge, and there's an exposed gravel bar, and it's just the perfect carp lake in a lot of ways. It's a nice size. I don't know what, I think they list it about 15 or 20 acres. You've got an arm as you come in that you drive along, which provides some quite intimate fishing, but the fish apparently travel up and down that a lot. And then you've got the open water expanse, again, more islands, and generally a shallow topography. It's sort of, I think 7 foot is about the maximum, so I've been told, that you're looking at, and a mixture of gravel bars and silt. So that's Thorny Weir. It's long been on our list for a shooting venue on location for Carp Academy, because it's got amazing looking carp in it. It's an open access day ticket lake. Anyone can come and fish it. And there's not just this lake, you've got the 𝗵𝗲𝗁 lake next door, which is a bigger, more almost more mystical lake. I think they've still got unknown fish in there. That's also day ticket. And there's a couple of other lakes on site, I think called Lizard, which are also accessible on day ticket. So lots of fishing available here at Thorny Weir. We're on the main lake, the most historic one, if you like, that's been the main spearhead of the commercial venture for the longest period of time. So it's more than 10 years since I last came here. It's a little bit of a gamble. It's a funny time of year, but we're going to roll the dice yet again for the Carp Academy cameras and see if we can get a result. We are at the back end of winter, thankfully, and you can probably hear by the honking of the geese that the spring equinox is just about here. The birds know it, and they're getting ready for all their frivolities. The geese are fighting over all the islands, trying to gain territory, and it's a bit of a mayhem time of year. But you know, March is a very unpredictable month. You know, in the past I can think of times in March where you get temperatures up to nearly 20 degrees, but at the same time you can get weather that we had last week, which was snow. Most parts of the country had snow last week. It seems to snow more in March than any other month of the calendar year. Not quite sure why that is, but that's been like that for a long time now. So I didn't manage a snow carp last week. I was out in it, and we actually caught a couple of fish where I was fishing over at the Suffolk Water Park, but the snow had melted by the time we got the fish in the nets. But anyway, it has been very cold, very unpredictable. The weather actually for the last couple of days, coinciding with our arrival, had been good, but tonight is forecast to go down -4 or 5, so very, very up and down. Now, yesterday I jumped the gun a bit and I got down ahead of the cameras, and that was largely down to the fact that the forecast was supposedly going to be a complete washout for yesterday. very, very tricky to get filming done properly when you've got a day of constant rain. So Ian, my faithful, brilliant cameraman, and I had a discussion, and Ian said, look, let's do Tuesday and Wednesday instead of Monday, Tuesday. So that's what we've elected to do. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to get down there and start on the day that we originally planned, because I wanted to hit the ground running. It's a difficult time of year. It's known to be a very tricky pit at certain times, you know. I thought we could be up against it. And this is our 6th in-session film for Carp Academy. We're not blanked yet. We've had some spectacular results. And I thought, you know what, with it being a bit of an unknown quantity, as I said, I haven't been here for 10 years, wasn't quite sure what to expect. I'm going to go and get there early, do a bit of filming myself that we can drop in, which isn't going to be the amazing 4K quality that Ian does, but it'll be more than usable to give you a flavour of what it was like when I arrived. So, as I said, I set off from Suffolk. Now, when I left Suffolk yesterday morning, it was 12 degrees at 5 AM, which was quite incredible, really. And it had been warm overnight. And on shallow lakes, you know, shallow lakes, guys, always be aware, they will react very quickly to sudden increases and sadly sudden decreases in temperature, which we've got dropping over us now. But that sudden pickup, when you've got a general sort of fairly sort of even topography of 7, 6, 5 foot, is going to have a positive effect. And bear in mind also that at this time of year, as I said, we're at the spring equinox now, so that means you've got equal light to equal day and night hours. Didn't say that very well, but you know what I mean. So it's 12 hours of dark, 12 hours of light, pretty much. So that has a huge impact on the behaviour and activity of everything in nature, and of course has a very profound effect on the carp. And it does mean that even when it's quite cold, once they've started to wake up and move about a bit, they tend to stay active, even though bites do obviously become harder to come by when it drops off, which it's doing tonight. But in the past, once I've found that, you know, in March, by the middle of March, which it is now, once the fish are up and about, they pretty much remain catchable there on in. So yeah, I got down here, hellish 4-hour drive, rerouted around the M25 a couple of times, closed junctions and all that malarkey. But eventually made my way down the familiar but long remembered old bumpy track to Thorny Weir. I was expecting it to be quite busy. There were only 4 other anglers on, which I was more than happy with. And of course, the first port of call with any session, and I know you've heard me go on about it many times, is get yourself in the right spot. That's it. There is nothing more important than that. And I thought, well, I've got a whole day, and if it takes me that until dusk to find the carp and set up in the right spot, then that's the sacrifice I'm willing to make. That's how important location is. So even with the prospect of a full day, actually the monsoon rain that they forecast never materialised. I mean, Ian and I could have started the session yesterday, but I mean, if I was as rubbish at my job as these weathermen, 𝗷𝗵𝗁𝗃𝗲𝗄 and various others, I don't even know if he's still doing it, but you think, cool, just to get the weather right, guys. So we ended up with no rain at all. It was quite a pleasant day. It was very warm. Temperature went from 12 up to 13 degrees. We had very strong southwesterly winds and westerly winds that actually peaked at nearly 60 miles an hour. So a big drop in air pressure. It's been 1,030 for a couple of weeks or more, probably more than that, and there's been no rain, there's been no wind. So suddenly, boom, it's dropped down to something like 985 yesterday. Big winds, big pressure drop, and an increase in temperature. Now you can bet everything you've got on black. That is going to have a positive impact on a lake as shallow as Thorny Weir. So felt we got lucky with arrival time and the timing of the session, because you have to plan sessions like this a little bit ahead. You can't just say, right, let's go in the morning, Ian, because we both got lots on. So I felt good, felt happy, I didn't feel lucky, because actually a lot of the fishing I've been doing lately on various different lakes had been a real struggle. So I was hoping to get that monkey off my back and see if we could get something positive going. But as I said, it's all about getting yourself in the right position from the get-go. There is nothing more important than that first decision that you're going to make. And my whole session was geared around that. As I said, if it took me an entire day, that first day, before I put the bivvy up and got in a swim, that was a sacrifice I was willing to make. As it happened, I got myself in a good vantage point and stood and watched the lake. The wind was blowing into me so hard it was making my eyes water, so it was very difficult to see what was going on. But when you turn up at a lake, not quite as early as I would have liked in the morning, but the gate opens at 7 and it was about 8:30 or so, I think, when I was having a look. But always try and get yourself in a position where you can see a big chunk of water. Doing a lap is, you know, things that's part of the legwork that you end up doing, but at that prime time of early-ish morning, you want eyes on as much of the lake as possible. Checking snags and under trees and so on is something I would expect to do later on in the day, probably as the fish have moved possibly out of open water into those overhangs. I wasn't even sure that was going to be a thing, but I needed eyes on as much of the lake as I could possibly see. So I stood there, eyes streaming from the wind, trying to pick out possible carp shows in amongst myriad coots, hundreds of coots and tufties and so on. It took only about 40 minutes, half hour, 40 minutes for me to get my first reward, which was 2 carp. Possibly the same fish came out over on the right hand bank, not far off a large island. I was like, wow, right, okay, let's hope there's no one around there. I knew there were a couple of cars at that end of the car park signifying there were anglers along this bank, but I grabbed a water bottle and came straight round here. And as I came into the swim, there was nobody here, it was empty. And I thought, right, okay, we've got something to work with now. I've seen 2 carp, this is a big deal. Don't forget, you know, the weather has been cold, it was snowing a couple of days before, and I thought, we've seen 2 carp, we've got something. If they had been the only 2 carp, that would have been it. I would have set up and got fishing for them. But my next port of call was just to put roots down in the swim. I put my water bottle down, so I've claimed it, and then just to watch the water. Now, it'd be an easy mistake to think, well, there's carp out there, there was a couple of fish shown, let's go and get the gear, but I'm in no rush. What I need to be able to do is pinpoint exactly where the fish are in the swim from here, not from where I was about 180 yards away on a different bank. So while the fish were active, to me, it's imperative to keep eyes on that zone and hope and pray that that wasn't a random show and we're going to get another visual opportunity from the area that we might want to fish from, so that we can put a red pin on our visual map of the swim and know exactly the area that we need to begin targeting. So that's what I did. I stood and watched and looked, and the minutes ticked by, and then the tens of minutes ticked by, and then after about half an hour, one came out. Happy days. Came out to the tip of his tail, actually. Stevie Wonder would have got it, but it was right there in the middle of the swim, sort of level with the island, and I thought, wow, this is fantastic. That's 3 shows. Did I run and get my gear at that point? No, because again, it's still a period of activity and I want eyes on it, and I want to be able to see as many shows during that window of activity as I can, so that when I start dissecting the swim with a bare lead, I know exactly where I'm interested in. So I continued to watch for another best part of an hour, and I ended up in total seeing 7 fish. So there I had 7 visual red pins dropped into the map of the swim. They were all in a similar area, all at a similar range. That was it, game on. And I was off and running to get the barrow loaded and get the gear down here. So as I said, we are 24 hours into the session. This is a recap of events since arriving. So after seeing those fish, dropping the visual red pins, knowing exactly where I needed to go at, I got my gear around here, and by that point it was probably only late morning, so I didn't expect to be in a situation where I was on showing fish that quickly. So major result, real blessing. So got some gear around here, and first port of call was to flick out a bare lead and see what's going on, because I've no idea what the bottom's like, I've no idea how weedy it is. So I got a 2.5 ounce lead and made some casts around the area where I've dropped the red pins. It's pointless setting out your stall away from where you've seen the fish. The area the fish were most focused on is the area that you need to try and exploit, and of course you need to ideally do that with as little intrusion as possible. So it was probably about 60 or so yards out, and With a 2.5 ounce lead, I can control it and let it go into the water gently. Now, you will find that very often carp will tolerate you leading around, just a bare lead. And it's a necessary part of getting fishing in a swim, unless you want to chance it with a chod or a bag, but I'm not really into that chancing game. You know, I had at that point potentially 3 nights, and I wanted to make sure everything was nailed on properly. And you will find that by stopping that lead, again, if you're not sure about casting technique, feeling the lead down and so on, do check out our very, very detailed success pack on that. And it's an invaluable skill, because if you do that in the vicinity of carp, very often they will tolerate it. Particularly on the day that I had yesterday, it was blowing an absolute hooligan of a wind. And I always feel like, you almost intuitively feel that the more turbulence and noise from nature there is, then the more muffled your own personal intrusions will be. So the thing that I find carp really do not tolerate, do not like, and will leave the area from, is when your lead goes in with a doosh. And you see this all the time, people casting out leads, and they either don't watch it against the sky or they don't bother and they just wait till it goes in. Now, if you cast even a 3 ounce lead, or certainly a 4 ounce lead, or a good sized lead, and you don't stop it before it hits the water, it goes in leaving this huge trail of bubbles and this really resounding thud. That horrible, horrible noise that reverberates through the swim. Now, if you do that a few times, you very quickly could experience a mass exodus of the resident carp. So careful casting with a lightish lead is a very, very important skill. So that's what I did. I set to work dropping the lead around the area that I'd seen the fish, and there were patches of gravel and there were patches of silt. I've got some very short lengths of new fresh weed growth, which was very nice. And after about 10 or so casts, I had the area reasonably mapped, and I thought there was a nice run of silt, and I thought, on a lot of lakes, most people target the rock hard gravel. The gravel really out there was very staccato. It was very very aggressive, harsh, pronounced type 1 hardcore, and it was, I like the hard gravel when it just purrs, when it's fine shingle. But yeah, there was a lot of lumpy stuff out there. I didn't fancy that at all. So I thought, I'm just going to fish it in the silt. So I got clipped up, and I thought, Then you think, how are you going to fish it? And I thought, well, there were 2 options. I thought I could go in with the Bermuda triangle, go in with the stringers, which I'm pretty sure would have worked. Or the other option that I had available to me was going in with the maggots, the crumb, and the bits and pieces with the depth charge system. And as I thought my way through it, I thought, actually, I'm going to go with the depth charge, because on a lot of lakes, that ban maggots and crumb, I've been dying to use that system, and you end up being forced to boilie fish. And I thought, well, actually here, there's no silly bait bans or anything. I can actually go in with the maggots and the crumb. So I married that with the depth charge, tiny little pop-up, trimmed down with a little bunch of maggots on top. And the mix was just, manila crumb, 2.3 bloodworm pellets, maggots. I put some hemp oil in. Hemp oil is a very, very good cold water oil, and it's the only oil I think that will really release in cold water conditions. And although we've had a bit of reasonable weather, as I said, it was snowing 4 days ago, so the water isn't going to be more than 6 degrees. I wouldn't 5 or 6 degrees. It's going to be very cold. So, but hemp oil is a great attractor. So I've got some hemp oil in there, a bit of the magic liquids as well, and made myself a nice mix, which I added red and white maggots to. Then I set about getting myself fishing, and this is where it got interesting. So I got my first rod sorted out and attached the depth charge, had it wrapped up, clipped up, ready. I knew where it needed to go, and I put one alarm in the ground, sent the bag out there, the depth charge out there, hit the clip, went down to the bottom. You don't get much of a drop. It's so shallow, it's sort of very hard to feel a drop, especially in that wind as well. That's one of the reasons why I changed the line, which I'll come on to later. But it went in perfect, so I thought, right, I put it on the alarm, set the bobbin on a little bit of a drop, and went back into the bivvy and started rigging up my next rod, the second rod. No, I had a few things to do, taking off old leaders and sorting out my gear, tying a new rig and everything. So it was probably about half an hour or so, and I was getting near to having the second rod ready to go when suddenly, beep, 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 and the bobbins hit the floor. And I looked up and there was a coot out there right by the spot. There's a lot of coots around this island, which have been a major pain, but I thought, you bugger, you've done me. I'm gonna have to redo that rod in a minute. Once you get tampered with like that, particularly on a depth charge PVA trap, you need to redo it. So I thought, right, I'll have to redo that in a minute. And then I carried on doing what I was doing, and I heard another bleep, and I looked at the bobbin, which was laying on the ground, and the head, because I've got swivel heads on the bobbin, the head was just twitching like that. And I thought, hello. Went down, picked up the rod, and there seemed to be something on that felt like, well, I thought it was a small bream or something, I didn't know what it was, and it kited right. In fact, I wasn't even sure it was a fish. It felt really odd, and it was only that I knew it was a fish because the line was just cutting through the surface going right. Very little resistance and coming towards me. And that is something you get an awful lot on barbless hook venues. And Thorny Weir is thankfully a barbless hook venue. I'm going to get more into that later on as well. And the fish will very often come towards you and try and give himself enough slack to get rid of the rig. It's another reason why I never fish slack lines on these, but again, I'm going to cover that later on. Anyway, the fish came in, felt really, really nothing, and I wasn't quite sure what it was. It hadn't even shaken its head once, and it came right down in close. I've managed to get my phone, which was on the tripod, because I was filming a few bits of me getting set up so that we could drop them into the film. Because as I said, Ian wasn't here yesterday. It was just me on my own, and just making a head start. So I've got a bit of film of the fight. Got that there, and eventually this fish has properly turned into a carp. But not only did it turn into a carp, it turned into a bloody big carp, and it started going. I ended up having it on probably for another 10 or 15 minutes close in, during which time I've seen this big gnarly set of shoulders, big black head come up a couple of times, and I knew it was a serious one. Eventually got him in the net, and deep joy, got myself a proper Thorny Weir old Colne Valley mirror carp, you know, one of those fish which is ridiculously old. You can see how lived in it is from its fins and its dorsal being all erratic, and you know, a proper nice one. Couldn't believe it, 31 pounds.
That's just mental. This is mental. Only got one rod out. Got an absolute monster in the net. Beast of a proper one. I just tried to record the camera like touching. It's all on a wonk. God, I was trying to do it with one hand just so to get the fight. Literally one rod out. Carp gods. Thank you.
As it happened, Ian was working in the not too far in the local area, and I rung him and I said, like, I've had a right result, and he said, look, I'll tell you what, I'll come up and film that and then I'll go back home. So bless him, he came up. So as you can see, guys, this fish, just exactly the sort of carp that people come to Thorny Weir for. Beautiful colours, very dark, massively wide across the shoulders. Probably in its prime, this fish probably would have been 35 plus, but it's a very, very old fish, and they do go backwards a little bit as they get older. But I wasn't complaining at all. An amazing looking creature, and to have hit the ground running on a lake that I've not been to for 10 years with only one rod out for half an hour to get a 30 pound, I just couldn't believe it. It was just like, wow. Thank you, carp gods. An amazing, amazing result. So Ian went off, the carp went off obviously, and I set about getting the remainder of the rods. There were still a couple of fish showing in the area, and it looked good for something else to happen. As the afternoon arrived, I managed to get, I'd had all three rods out on depth charges in this similar zone where I dropped these red pins. Nothing else happened. I redid them all with fresh bags just as it was getting dark, ready for the night. And the next thing that happened, there was a couple of fish that showed long behind me, behind the area, just as it was getting dark. and I was getting a few little liners. Now I'm fishing with back leads. Again, this is something I'm going to get into and explain and talk through later. But fishing with back leads, and I'm still getting little knocks and lifts and so on. So I thought, yeah, they're still out there. They're just not showing much. I just got in the sleeping bag because the night before when I came down, I was so excited, going to Thorny Weir, you know, banging old fish, and really up for doing this session for you guys, and really excited. And I'd had about 2 hours sleep. It was just a horrendous insomnia night. So I was ready for the sack. I got in bed about 10 o'clock, and probably about 10:30, I was just starting to dribble on the pillow a little bit, and the middle rod's gone. And again, exactly the same fight as the first one. In pitch, I say pitch darkness. We might try and drop one of these photos in actually, but you can. It's incredibly light here. Maybe it's just light pollution, I guess, from London and the airport and that. But even at 11 o'clock at night, it was pretty light. So I could see the line cutting through, and again, similar fight, hardly any resistance. The fish came to. When you've got that, you've just got to wind and wind and wind and try and make solid contact with the fish, because they will try and give themselves just enough slack to ditch that barbless hook. Anyway, it came in and then started fighting hard, just carbon copy of the first fight. And then I've netted this ghost common, which went 22 pounds. As you can see, nice big orange tail. Really, really pleased with him. Did a few self takes and slipped him back, redid the rod. And that brought us up to this morning, a biteless night the rest of the night. And there's a load of big black clouds gathering over there in the distance, so even though it's nice and blue sky at the minute, looks like it might pour down shortly. But that's the story so far. We've got loads more to talk about, loads more to get into. We've got 2 nights still to play with, and incredibly we've got 2 fish in the bag, so I'm very excited about the prospects. And yeah, at the moment it doesn't feel too bad. Whether we'll get a third one, I don't know, but as I said, we've got lots to talk through, lots to go through. I'll see you again shortly.